Hello techies, welcome to IT Tech Solutions. Today in this video we will see what is a step function, how we can integrate CloudWatch rules to trigger this step function, and this whole setup how we can use to trigger some of the Lambda codes. So first of all, what is a step function and why do we use a step function? If you have a series of workflow that you want to do, I can show that diagram in the step function homepage. If you just go to the step function homepage in your AWS console, you will see that if we want to build a series of some functions, uh, maybe connecting to DynamoDB or connecting to RDS, invoking Lambda functions, so you have a complex workflow. So there we can use this step function. It is very nicely represented as a flow chart, and the it generates the backend code where we can integrate various pieces and various services of this AWS code to orchestrate our full workflow. What happens is if you have a single Lambda function, right? We have something called as triggers here, and we can add a trigger. In this trigger we can give the CloudWatch rule or the event bridge, okay, to automate it and to run this step function, run this lambda function continuously, maybe following some pattern or something. So we can very well define a rule and execute this lambda function, but this is about only a single lambda function. What if we have a series of lambda functions? We want to run multiple lambda functions, and there is some dependency between these lambda functions. There is dependency with some of the database we want to connect. So all these things we can integrate using this step function. So let's just begin. I'll just give a small demo how we can create a simple lambda function and how we can use step functions to call this lambda function, and then how we can trigger it via the CloudWatch rules. So this entire demo, let's see how we can perform this. So I'll go back to my step function console. Here we'll just create first of all, let's go and create two lambda functions. Okay, so here you can see I have created one lambda function. This is very basic simple lambda function where I am just returning a value of 100. So why I am returning a value of 100? Because I want to show how this variables and how this data flows between one step to another step, or I can say between a state to another state. Okay, so how this entire flow of this variable or the values it flows through the step function, you'll get some basic idea. Obviously, this is whole lot different topic. I'll be covering in maybe in the future videos. But for this, I'll just showcase how the values transfers from one step to another step. So that is why in my first lambda, I'm just returning a value of 100. Um, and in the next lambda, if you see the second lambda, what I will do from the with the help of step function, I'll catch that lambda value which is returned by the first lambda, and I will pass on to the second lambda, and I'll try to display that here. Okay, so in the second lambda I'm just returning the value which I'll be passing to this lambda, which I'll be getting from the first lambda. So these are the two lambdas, only the return functions I'm using. Other things I don't need here for this demo. So my lambda is ready. So these two lambdas I want to create a dependency between these two, and the output of first lambda I'll be passing to the second lambda, and using that output I want to process the data. So let's see. I'll go to step function. We'll create a new step function. So now this AWS has uh, AWS has this changed this UI, and it has made it very user friendly. Now we can drag and drop and create the workflow. In initial days, we had to write the backend code. Nowadays, you don't have to write any backend code. It generates all the codes by itself. So there you can see in the left side, we have some options to uh, put as a step in our step function. So there is lambda invoke, SNS, and ECS, and many other things. Okay, so for just this demo purpose, I'll just use this lambda function. We just need to drag and drop on my flowchart. Okay, so first lambda invoke function invoke step I have added. Okay, now in the right side we have to configure this. Okay, so first of all we can give the step name here, or the state name. I would say lambda 1. Okay, just lambda 1. I'll be invoking my lambda 1 from this state. Okay, and then the other option, integration type, let it be optimized. API parameters, we'll say our lambda function 1. Okay, so API parameters lambda function name, I just browsed it and selected my lambda function 1. Next one, payload, right? So for first lambda, as you can see, right, in my lambda 1 I don't need any input. Basically it is just returning a value. So first one, I'll not add any payload to it. Payload as in it is just the input to this lambda. I'll say no payload. But here you can see the options that enter a payload. If you want to enter some input values, we can very well define it in this JSON. If we want to pass it from the another state, we can use first one. But for this one, since this is the first state, I don't have to add any payload here, so I'll keep it as no payload. The next options are the IAM roles and all. So let it be, because it is for cross account access. I don't give I'll not give anything. So for first state I am good. Let's create the next state. Again, my next state is lambda function invoke. I'll add this. Now if you see the first state here, it is second state is dependent on first state, right? So automatically what it does is, it in next state now it fills. My next state is lambda invoke, but let me first change this name. So just click on the second state. It will open the configuration for the second state. So here let's give as lambda 2. Now, once lambda 2 state is defined, I will have to browse to pick that lambda from. So in the payload, in the function name, I'll give this time lambda 2. Okay. Now my second state will be calling lambda 2. Okay, and in this payload, now what I want is, whatever output my first lambda generates, I want to use that output as input to my second lambda, or the second state. So here in payload for my second state, I will have to give a use state input as payload. So whatever input it is getting, use that as a payload and pass it on to the lambda function. So I'll check this one. We'll use this though. So now the second state is also created. Now first state, if you see here, it is defining next state is lambda 2. Lambda 2 is nothing but this one, and in my lambda 2 next state would be empty, because it's just go to end. So this flow, it translates into this, and I will show you it also generates the code. But let's first check the input and output. So for my first lambda, I don't want any input, so no need to filter anything or do anything, right? But output, I want to capture the output, right? So in output tab, I will say there are three options, right? So filter output with output path. So I will explain these details more in my next video, because I'll be talking about all the variables and how we are passing this, passing values from one state to another state. That is, as I said, right, it is a whole different topic. But for this one, to capture the output from lambda 1, we will say that filter output with output path, and I'm by default it is dollar dot payload. So this dollar is nothing but it is the complete set of input. So my first lambda, by default what happens is, state machine, it passes some JSON to this lambda, and that JSON I'm saying that it is defined by this dollar. Okay, so dollar means complete input, set of input, and then dot payload is whatever this will generate, right? I want to I add it to my actual input as a payload, and then pass that payload to the second lambda. So by default what happens is, whatever is the output of any state, it passes on to the next state. Okay, and we can filter out, we can modify it as per our needs. So this we can define in input and output. So output, I'll just keep it as default, pass everything as payload to the second lambda. Okay, but I'll explain these things in my second video. Now this is the thing, right? So first lambda is fine, second lambda input, uh, by default whatever is coming as input, I don't need to filter anything. But if you want to filter any particular path or the particular key, we can filter it out and pass on to my second lambda. And output of my second lambda, again I am saying that whatever it generates the payload, just pass it on as a full output. So now let's just create this one, let it create all these things. I'm okay with this. Now this lambda, this step function is created, right? Now we'll see the definition of it. Okay, now if you see here lambda 1, so this is the entire code which got generated, right? So by default it is generating this error handling. We'll also see this also in the next video. And here this is the code representation of what we had defined. So first state is a task, type is task. Okay, and it starts at lambda 1. I am seeing output path as entire payload, dollar dot payload. So whatever comes as input, it will append that payload. And resource is lambda invoke, and my function name that I have given is coming here, that arn is coming in the function name, right? And then I'm not passing any value to lambda 1, right? So here you can't see any payload or any JSON as input provided to the lambda function. But for the second lambda, if you see, we will have a payload which we are passing to the second lambda. So here you can see payload dot dollar. I'm passing everything. So whatever is coming as input to the second state, pass it on as payload, and this lambda will use this payload as an input. Okay, and here again it has added by default some error handling, and max attempts, and what is the retry values, all those things it has added. So basically this is the whole thing that we would try to run. I will also just give you a brief idea about these variables. So as I said, right, we have some parameters and some variables. We call it as input path, the output path, right? So you can just see it. What is input path? It selects what portion of the entire input payload to be used, right? That is what we can filter it out. Similarly, the output path determines what to send to the next state. So these things we can filter out. If you don't filter out anything, by default it will pass everything, that is the dollar. Okay, so this is the documentation. If you can, if you want, you can just read it out. It's easy to understand. But yeah, in my next video I'll explain these things in detail. So this is how the state machine is defined. Now what we can do is we can manually run this state machine. Okay, so I will just go to that state machine. I will say start execution. This way we can check locally if state machine, all the states are working fine or not. So you can see lambda 1, lambda 2, it got created. I mean, it got executed successfully. Now to check the results also, we can just click on this input. As I said, I don't have any input. It is by default passing this JSON as an input. But output, since I am returning 100 from my lambda, so that is my output of this first state. Now, first state output will be passed to the second state. Now, if you check the second state, its input is 100. So whatever was generated from lambda 1 has been passed to lambda 2, and this is the input to the second state, and output of this second state is whatever I am passing from my lambda function 2, right? If you remember, I'll show that again. Lambda 2, in lambda 2 we are passing just a return. Output of lambda 1 is the event. So event is nothing but the payload that is being passed, and payload is nothing but the return from the first value, so that is 100. So I'm passing 100 value to the second lambda, and it is processing it. So this way you now at least you will be clear how the values are getting passed from first state to the second state. It all happens with the dollar function. So just remember, dollar means everything. whatever is there in here, it will be passing that as output. Okay, so dollar dot payload. So this is how the state machine runs. Now we have tested our step function. It is working fine. Now we can't every time run it manually, right? There has to be some process that we want to run it hourly or maybe half hourly or maybe once in a day. So that freedom gives CloudWatch rule gives that freedom. Okay. So now what we can do is we can create a CloudWatch rule, and then we can execute our step function every time on a periodic basis. So whenever this gets triggered, the steps that we have defined here will run sequentially. So in future videos, I'll show there are multiple types of steps also, or the states. There are parallel states. There are some conditional states. So based on the complexity of your workflow, we can define really complex workflow here using all those different types of states. Like for example, now I just used a task state. This is just a task state. So whatever we define in this task state, it will execute it. So let us quickly create a CloudWatch rule so that we can run the step function on a periodic basis. So I will just say like test rule, name is test rule, description is optional, let it be. So here we have two options. One is a rule with an event pattern and another one is schedule. Let's go with schedule. Continue to create rule. Okay, so here you can see schedule free grain schedule, and there is another one is schedule that runs on a regular rate. So we'll select this one, and let's just give for example 1 minute so that I can demo it quickly. 1 minute, and if we select this one, we'll have to define the complete cron expression. Okay, so these are the two options. So rate 1 minute. Okay, then I'll do next. So which AWS service we want to trigger at every 1 minute? So we'll just say AWS service, and here we will just find step function as a service. I will say step function state machine. Which state machine? Then I can give my ARN, or it will, if it is not coming, we can just refresh. So this is my state machine that we just now created. Let's select that, create a new role. Let it create a new role for me. I don't have to go and check additional settings. I'll just skip to review and create. I can just review what is the rule that I am creating and then create rule. So once it is created, by default it will be enabled so that it will start running from the next minute. So let it just create. Yeah, it got created. Now you can see this test rule, and I have defined it at a fixed rate of 1 minute. So every minute it will start executing it, and targets. If you see, I have defined the target as my state machine. What is my state type is target type is step function state machine, and this is the role that it has created for me, because CloudWatch rule needs privilege to execute the step function on behalf of me. So that is why it has created. If you want, you can check this rule also. It will have a permission to invoke lambda, sorry, invoke a step function. We can check that what all policies it has attached to it. If you just expand this one, you will see allow and start execution. So state machine execution permission is allowed here. Now, once it is created, it is in enabled. We can disable anytime from this button, but let it be enabled. And if you just see the logs of our state machine, you will see the next run would also have been done, right? So here you can see just like some time back, 1 minute back, this step function, it got executed automatically. Now if I just wait for one more minute, I'll see the third iteration also coming in. So very soon we'll see the third step function also. By the time, we'll just, let's see how is the result for this one. So it got automatically executed, and here we can see the same. as we had tested it, right? So lambda function one. Now I told you, right? It will pass on some metadata as input to this. So this is nothing but dollar. Okay. If I say dollar, that means all of these values of this JSON is included in that dollar. So we can very well add something here using input result or output path, right? And we can filter out also. Okay, so this is the default input, just a metadata, and output is the return of the lambda function, right? And the second lambda output is the lambda 1, whatever lambda 1 value was passed to second lambda, it processed it, and then it got completed successfully. Now if I go back, probably we'll see the third iteration also by now. See, the third or iteration also is now executed just after 1 minute, right? It was 21/7 and 21/8. You can see the next execution happened. So this way it will keep on executing this process after every regular interval that we define. And we can keep on executing whatever workflow that we have defined to process the data. Maybe picking up some data from S3, processing it, doing some functionalities, and then putting the data into some RDS or maybe in DynamoDB. So all those steps can be defined, and it will keep on executing. So to disable it, we'll just go here and then disable my step function CloudWatch rule, which will stop triggering my step function. And if you just check uh, the CloudWatch or the logs for this lambda, you will see those lambdas just now might have already logged, and it would have also uh, captured in the CloudWatch logs. We can just check those logs as well. So if I just open the log of my lambda function, right, you can see just now it ran successfully, it ran successfully, and these are the outputs what uh, if any print statements or any logging we'll do in the lambda function, those things will get captured here. So if your step function is failing for any reason, we can come and see. First thing is here we can see what was the error. If you just click on this, it will show the errors and whatever is the problem, right? It will display those things here, and we can also check in the CloudWatch logs. So more on the details of the data flow and the other parts, maybe in the coming videos. I'll definitely try to post a new video for those details. I think by now you might have got at least some basic idea. So we'll see you in the next video. Until then, bye bye.